Hello, hello, hello. Thank you to our listeners. And if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you to our viewers. This is your host, Alicia Brown, for the Entrepreneurs Lounge radio show and podcast. And I have not one, but two law enforcement professionals with me today. So, of course, we know that we're living in a pandemic. We know we're living at a time of high racial unrest, social injustices, and protests, among other things. So there's some issues that we really need to talk about. And you know this platform is all about exposing the myths of entrepreneurship and releasing the weight of it all. So you may be thinking, why are we doing this in law enforcement? Is this geared toward law enforcement professionals? Not necessarily, but the fact is we all live in society, so this affects every single person, despite your race, despite your economic status, and despite what your profession or your business is. Now, there's an alarming fact that I really want to share with you so you really understand why this is so important. One of the things that has been noted is that communities that have minorities, and the minorities are the majority of the population, oftentimes they're not reflected by the law enforcement members. And what they're finding statistically is for communities that have a large or largely minority populated, when they don't have that representation in law enforcement, crime rates are higher. And there might be different reasons for that, but it is something that we need to take note of. So today we have Deputy Sheriff Ross, who is a law enforcement officer in the state of North Carolina. He has served as Deputy Sheriff of Durham County for 6 years. For the past 4 years, he has served as a Certified Field Training Officer for the School Resource Officers Division. Now, prior to law enforcement, he served as Detention Officer in the Triangle area of North Carolina. And please help me welcome Deputy Sheriff Ross to the show. How are you doing this evening?
Doing great, Alicia. It's a pleasure to be here, speak with you, be on your
Awesome.
show.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time out. It's very important that we have this discussion, this real discussion with the times of social injustice, the protests, just everything that's going on. But of course, at the Entrepreneurs Lounge, I like to give you double bang for your buck. So we also have someone who is no stranger to the show. You've seen her before, the amazing Amazon, Mrs. Saudia White, and she does have a law enforcement background that I am going to let her introduce herself and tell you about. Miss Saudia.
Hello again. Alicia, thank you for having me as well. I'm happy to be back on the show.
Yes.
I love it. So yes, I do have an extensive history in law enforcement. It began in New York as a school safety task force officer. Spent quite a few years there, and then right after 9/11, I moved on to Hampton, where I joined a private police organization, HUPD, and that's Hampton University's police department. So a big change there. I went from the streets to a collegiate setting, which was huge. And right after staying there for a while, I was offered a position in Williamsburg, and I was happy to join the force in Williamsburg because as much as I love the collegiate settings, I wanted to get back to the street work that I was comfortable with. So I joined the Williamsburg Police Department, and that's where I happily but sadly had to retire earlier than expected. I had a disability retirement. I crashed my cruiser, and that ultimately ended my police career. But I loved what I used to do, and I love and respect law enforcement, and I respect this young man on the screen with us today for dedicating his service and his time still on in police work. It's a tedious career, and I feel as though we don't get the accolades, a lot of us, that we deserve. Absolutely. And most of the times we get the short end of the stick, even, when we had nothing to do with the situation. but it all comes with the job, and it's the love of the job that most of us who are good officers tend to stay within the career because they love what they do. They love the community. They love ensuring that people are safe and making a difference within the community. And that's ultimately why I signed up to be a police officer, to make a difference.
Absolutely. So you are like the perfect co-host today. Having that background, both of you having some similar things. You know, you worked before in the detention center, so you're working with the children. You're on the streets. You have your own children. So this collection, I would say, we have here is the perfect foundation for the conversation, the real talk we need to have, because we're seeing a lot of things. There's a lot of opinions being thrown out there, but sometimes we need to look at the perspective from the people that are actually in that position and go to them and ask some of these questions so we can really know what we need to do for effective change. So I'm gonna go right into that with Deputy Sheriff Ross. You know, I mentioned a little bit in the beginning how, you know, there's no surprise that large minority populations often don't have a large number of law enforcement officers that match their reflection. It was actually a University of Maryland criminologist who found that crime rates in minority neighborhoods are lower when local police and government diversity matches the community. So, you know, at a time we know around the country, we have less and less minority law enforcement officers. So Deputy Sheriff Ross, why isn't there more diversity in law enforcement? You know, why aren't there more members like yourself in these largely populated minority communities?
Well, Alicia, I believe it's a cultural problem where within our Black community, working in the law enforcement profession isn't an ideal job, isn't the ideal career. There's a lot of stereotypes that go along with it. You know, I work in a school setting where kids, you know, if you work in the law enforcement, you're considered an op, which is slang for being a snitch. And working in that type of profession and living in that type of community where they live in and where there is crime, it's not a good thing to become working in law enforcement. And so we have to get over that barrier first. And then those that aren't affected by the stereotypes that do want to work in law enforcement, some things as far as like education can hold them back, whereas passing just the basic knowledge test or exam, you know, to join the agency can be problematic, you know, as far as reading and writing. And so that can hold us back. And most minorities, not all, but some minorities might have some type of criminal background that might show up on their background checks that can prevent them from proceeding further in the application process. And so everything starts at home in the address. So, so focusing on education and eliminating those stereotypes and being more supportive of law enforcement officers that are working in the profession now, just being that supportive. So I think we can start there first.
And you mentioned the stereotypes and some of the limitations that hold them back from actually joining law enforcement. So for the few minorities that actually join it, members like yourself who say, you know, this is something that you love, you have a heart for this, for change, why isn't there more done to get people like you? Like if we have these issues of, we know education is the problem in some communities that prevent them from being applicants, or there's a background that, you know, some criminal issues that prevent them from that. Why isn't more being done in their communities to deal with these issues beforehand and really recruit them, sort of like, you know, sometimes the military would do, get them a little bit earlier to try to sway them to be able to come over to there?
That's a great question. That's actually why I'm working in the school setting, so I can dispel those type of myths and interact with the students there. Every week I'm having a presentation. We call them classroom presentations, where we go in and speak with the students about the field of law enforcement, just changing their perspective, and then just me leading by example, you know, showing them that what you see on TV isn't exactly, you know, how we act in public or in real life. you know, and showing them that officers do care about them, their safety, and what's going on in their communities. So just giving them a different perception of law enforcement. You know, I believe in, you know, focusing on the seed, like you said, getting them while they're young. So when they get older, it's kind of hard to, you know, prune them away from becoming criminals.
Right.
So that's exactly my efforts now.
Okay, and we definitely commend you for that, because so many times people will look at that information and say, you know, there they are on the street, or, you know, even unfortunately, sometimes in their very own house, you're going to be just like your father. You know, he's in prison, you're going to be just like him. You know, it's nice to hear that there's someone trying to, you know, talk to them, show them that what you see about law enforcement is not true. And here are some of the things, just building that relationship, building that ability for them to look at you as a person and not whatever stereotype they're seeing. So while we have that stereotype sometimes in these communities about, you know, what law enforcement is, you know, to fear them or they're snitches or whatever, I can imagine that as a Black male, you probably have had some stereotypes inside certain environments. Let's talk about that.
As far as certain environments, what environments are you speaking of actually? As far as
I'm not going to necessarily say where you work now, but I'm saying, you know, for instance, I love a new commercial that's out, and I can't tell you what organization puts it out. But I love how the woman that's in it, she keeps saying, I am Black. And you don't necessarily see that I'm a Black officer. But when I go here, when I do this, I am Black. So there are times if you're not in your uniform, you're going to feel, you know, you're going to face stereotypes like everybody else. And then there are times when you are in your uniform, you know, let's just say the current department you work for now, it's great, this doesn't exist. But I can take you out of this environment, and when I put you in another environment, same position, it'd be a whole different story. So I can imagine, you know, in the community, certain places you go, when you say you're law enforcement, there's a negative perception with the public. But I can imagine certain work environments, there would be that same type of biasness and stereotypes as well, even though it's within the force.
Yes, absolutely. From speaking with colleagues and other officers from different agencies, I've heard stories, you know, of them, you know, of course, being stereotyped. Once you cross over into law enforcement, those stereotypes still exist.
Yes.
You know, just because you have on a badge doesn't change your complexion of your skin.
That's right.
You know, so you still have to deal with the stereotypes from your own people, as far as being Black in your communities, as well as others that work inside the agencies that might be racist or have their implicit biases guided through the, you know, from the media or how they were raised. And so there's a constant battle on both ends, you know, to dispel those. And then when you have to answer calls, like say for us in the sheriff's office, for example, you go into rural areas in the counties where there's still Confederate flags and you're the primary officer, you have to respond out there by yourself to handle the situation, not knowing how that resident may respond to your presence, because first thing they see is your skin.
Absolutely.
And so you might have to deal with that type of situation.
Yeah, and I think that's, when we're having all of these discussions, I think that's the part that a lot of times there's no focus on. You know, while you're condemning law enforcement, you know, and you assume, let's just say if it's a race thing. So maybe they would, you know, condemn white police officers, but then when it comes to your own, no, you know, he's one of us, but that's not the case. So you look at that police officer, that law enforcement official, a lot of times they're taking the heat from the community. They're taking the heat from inside, or for those that they're actually going to serve and things like that. They're under all that pressure. And then we have to remember the profession, much like the military, or in some cases it can be worse depending on what your position is in the military. Every day you go out, your life is on the line. Every day. So I'm dealing with the inside pressures due to my skin color. I'm dealing with the outside pressures and the same thing that people now are up in arms about. Same thing that officer may be going through, but still has that title and has that mission, I should say, to protect and serve. And I don't think that people are giving too much credence to that. You're putting your life on the line, but you're getting it from both ends, the pressures, the same things that people are protesting about and they're up in arms about. That police officer, that minority law enforcement official who is serving in a capacity for your safety is getting all of that and is also getting it from some of you that are protesting. So, you know, I can't imagine not being in that position, exactly what that must be like from every day. So how do you keep going? What drives you to keep doing this with all of those things you might be experiencing?
Honestly, it's my faith that keeps me going. One, because every time I step out of my house and put on my uniform and whatever I do, I ask myself, is what I'm doing, is it pleasing to God, first and foremost? Mm-hmm. He put me here for a mission. He gave me this position for a reason. So my job is to carry out his duties. And so when we first sign on to this profession, they tell us up front, you know, you have to remove all your biases, put it to the side. You're working for the people now. You serve the people. No matter what their beliefs are, you have to serve the people. They gave an example of if we had to one day work a parade or a protest for those that wear the white coats and white hoods. I'm not going to say their organization, but if they were to have a rally and they needed protection, we provide that service. Wow. So we have to put those biases away and work for the people. And I know at the end of the day, at the end of the day, right, my job is to protect the people, no matter how they feel towards me or their indifference. And everything we do is, you know, is protect and serve and be there for the people. So I'll just put that to the side and open up and just start communicating. A lot of it is communication. You know, people want respect. You know, they treat them how they want to be treated, how you would like to be treated.
I like that because, you know, sometimes when there's so much chaos and there's so much noise going on, a lot of times it's like we have to go back to the basics. We might see all of this and we might see it magnified, but there's always that underlying issue that's much more simpler than what you're seeing. So sometimes we need to go back to the basics that everybody's really just asking for respect.
Right.
They're asking for respect. We have this imbalance that's been going on far too long. They're experiencing various things in their community and they're just asking for respect, not all these other things that sometimes in biasness people want to attribute to it, or sometimes people are overthinking it, but it may just be the simple human rights issues and how we're responding to different things. Those are certain things we need to keep in mind. So I want to ask you one last question because I know Mrs. White has some questions, especially being someone who is from former law enforcement. But I want to ask you that people are saying or suggesting that we should defund the police. That's the solution. We need to defund the police. What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't grasped the idea of defunding the police. I'm not sure if they want to reallocate funds within the law enforcement division or department, and will it affect sheriff's office or is it just the police? And what type of services are they trying to, you know, ban or take away funds from? And I'm not sure if people realize how it may impact themselves in their own community.
Right.
No.
By defunding the police. And so my question is, what exactly do they want to change? Like, what is it that they want done as far as defunding? What are they trying to solve with that? Because I hear on one end, they're screaming more training, but they want to defund the police. And training costs money. And so I'm not sure exactly what the people are really asking for. We know what the reasons of why they're upset, why people are upset, why we're upset. But there needs to be something. I'm sorry. Where'd I go?
So yeah, like you were saying, you're not sure what part they're talking about funds, but yeah, You know, I think it's similar to, I'm trying to think of what else we can think like that. You know, sometimes I guess people would, especially now, might say that about the education system. Because if you're not going to be sitting here teaching the children like usual, or if you know, whatever the reason, we should just defund that. But like you said, there's different implications. And I think what we need to understand, this deals with your safety. Even if you don't like, maybe it's the officers in your neighborhood or your community or what they're doing. And we understand if there's been a lot of police brutality or there's been a lot of just unnecessary killings, we can understand how people are emotional and people are upset and they're demanding justice. But when you come up with defund the police, that's much bigger than what you're saying to solve that problem. Now we have a safety issue. You know, I remember it's like the water treatment plants. Certain things, when the city would ever cut back on funding or the states would cut back on funding, depending on your state, who is over that, they would cut back from that area because they knew, even though there might be some balance issues, this deals with human safety. We have to have good water quality because when we don't, all the residents can get sick. So I look at that similar when it comes to defund the police. You might have an issue with this and you don't think this is right, but when you look at the whole totality of what law enforcement is supposed to be doing, it's public safety. And you know, there's always the egregious actions of a few that taint it for everybody.
Right.
And everybody is clumped in, according to some people, as, you know, bad cops and they're all out here dirty and you can't trust. It's like politicians. Not all of them are bad. There are a lot of people that show up every day for that office. They do an outstanding job. They're lobbying for the people. They're lobbying for the issues. But you do have some that are corrupt. And now it puts a tainted picture on the whole population. So, you know, defund the police, I think that's one of the conversations that need to be had too. Where do you really understand all that law enforcement is responsible for? And if we did cut, you know, in retribution, we just cut 10%, 20%, 30%, all the services that law enforcement does for you, what that means as a safety issue and risk. So this is why we're having this conversation, because there's a lot of things being thrown here, and we get it. In anger, in times of just social unrest, people have enough. They have to do something, and that is understood. But at the same time, if it's not going to get you the change you desire, or what I would say would be effective change to deal with the problem, some of these things we just don't need to do. You know, we can be upset. There's nothing on you being upset. But all of these actions and things that people are throwing out, we need to deal with what is the real problem. Because it's not just our community, but it's also your family, your children, your spouse, your siblings, your whoever that makes up your community. So, you know, if we do it to one, it's going to affect everything that each of us individually cares about. But I'm going to turn this part over to Mrs. Sadia White, because I know, coming from a law enforcement background, she has some very special questions that need to be asked.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you. So, Deputy Ross, I've had the pleasure of speaking to you off the grid, and we got into some great communication, but some of the things that I wanted to highlight in reference to you being a law enforcement officer and a father of two young males, how do you explain to them police brutality and some of the explicit biases that they may encounter, especially and why it occurs within the African American community, and why so often times does it end up being a deadly encounter with law enforcement officers?
That's a pretty deep question. So my son and daughter, I have a brief conversation with them. I don't go into too much details with them because they're kind of young. And so I try not to corrupt their minds too early, but I still let them know, have them be aware of what's going on around the world so they're not caught off guard. And my thing, I explained to them, is that there's bad people in this world no matter where you go, you know, no matter what profession they work in. And so you just have to be careful, you know, with how you treat people and how you act around certain people. And so I explained to my son that when you're encountered with law enforcement, the best thing for you to do is just comply. You know, whatever that officer asks you to do, just go ahead and comply to the best of your ability. And if the officer does something that you disagree with in the streets, or it's not the place to argue with that officer, because that officer has authority in the streets. They have control of that situation and that scene. And if it comes out that the officer violated your rights, you know, we can hire an attorney and handle it in the courtroom, which is where all battles are fought, in the courtroom at the end of the day. So those are the type of conversations I have with my children.
And you know, that's a great answer. And I apologize, you said a son and a daughter. So do you have the talk with your daughter as well in reference to how she should behave with interact with law enforcement? Because oftentimes we find ourselves having these conversations with our males, but what about our daughters? Look at Sandra Bland, you know,
Yes.
you know, so what would you say to your daughter?
Yeah, well, she's 5 now, so I kind of focus on just listening and following directions. You know, we're working on that still, just listening and following directions.
Do
But
you feel like you would have to have that conversation with her as well?
absolutely, absolutely, and it's not just a one-time conversation. These are conversations that to be had over and over on a consistent basis. So it's you know, stuck in their head, and you know, it's engraved in their brains. You know, how to act. It becomes second nature. You know, how to act, not just with law enforcement, even in schools, any authoritative figure. You know, so yeah, I have those conversations with my daughter as well.
That's awesome. And how do you get them to, well, your son in this case, how do you get your son to still believe in justice and law enforcement as a whole? Because he may feel kind of, you know, there might be something there that he loves his father, obviously, but how do you get him to still believe in justice? You see the news, he sees the news, he understands what's going on. And, you know, to him, he may not feel like justice is being met.
Right. So I use those type of situations as a teaching point as far as the importance of his education, you know, so in certain leadership positions within your communities. So him focusing on his education, and he sees something that he don't agree with or like, or don't see justice, now you can push to put yourself in a position to make change. And so a lot of us, we've been sitting back and asking for, I guess, favor from politicians that don't look like us.
Right.
And so we have to start taking action now as far as being more serious about government leadership, going for those positions and voting. Voting is definitely a good start, but we have to focus on our education and political education and have more people that care about our community in those type of seats, in those offices. And so I explained to them, you know, education isn't just about you. Yeah, you might have days that you don't feel like going to school, but you never know where your education will take you and who may depend on you and your knowledge. And so those are the type of conversations I have with my son when it comes to justice and the focus on the controllables. You can't control anything outside of yourself. The only thing you can control is yourself. And so those are the conversations that, you know, my son and I, we have on a daily basis.
I think it's so necessary that our children, especially African-American children, have those conversations, especially with their fathers in this time that we're in. So necessary. And if they come from a single parent household, whomever they're in that household with, I think that's really necessary that we not only teach them how to respond to law enforcement, but what to do when there is the riots are happening. And Alicia and I have spoken about this a lot of times. I've said on many occasions, what do we do after the riots? Okay, how do you train your children after the riots? Like, how do you train them to go forth and really allow their voices to be heard? Because if you notice during the George Floyd protest, a lot of our youth came out and they voiced how they felt, but they were also a part of the rioting, and a lot of them did it some of them did it in a negative way, some of them did it in a positive way. So I feel like we owe it to our children to explain to them that there are different ways in which you can voice your opinion and where your voice can really be heard. And I love what you said about the voting and getting in there and voting different people in. And how about us lobbying to get different bills changed? How do you feel about teaching the youth that? You work in a school. What if there was a class set up where you taught your youth how to lobby against different things that they felt needed to change?
I would absolutely advocate for that, because that's something that's not really taught in schools.
Right.
That I know of. Some schools may focus on that, on government, especially on as far as voting and lobbying and protests and how to do it correctly. Because right now I feel like a lot of our protesters are just out protesting without a plan or a purpose.
Yes.
Please say that again.
I was going to ask that. Say it again.
Without a, what did you say? Without a what?
Plan or purpose.
And a what? Thank you. A plan or purpose. Someone that gets it. Because
right.
During all of the rioting that I saw, and as powerful as it looked with the pumping of the fist and the signs in the air, what are you going to do afterwards with all of this? How do we put all this into perspective to make it work for us?
It seemed like right after the riots, they started speaking of Black economics. So, okay, we have Black economics in motion, then what? Once we facilitate all this money, where are we sending this money to? Is it going towards promoting more governmental leadership, or is it more programs for our communities? Where are we doing once we circulate our Black dollars within our communities? Right. So it needs to be a plan of action. And I haven't seen a plan of action, and it hasn't been highly publicized as anything else through social media.
And I would say this, Deputy Ross, I would say that I feel as though, and I'm just speaking, this is my opinion, the protesters are out and they feel like they got a lot done. Oh, the statues are coming down. To me, I can give a hill of bean about a statue, because that's not what's going to save my child's life on a traffic stop, police reform, restructure. There's not, what about the education that in many low-income African-American communities or minority communities, what about that? We're focused on these things that really don't matter to me. Yes, it's great. Statues, you know what I mean? How do you feel about that? Do you feel that that's a powerful move with all these statues coming down, or do you feel like that's something to pacify the minority communities?
Those are nice gestures. The street paintings, they were beautiful. Taking down the statues, okay. But like you said, what are you actually going to do for our communities? How are we going to improve? What change is going to come, about all of this? Let's not have this protest, because we all remember the LA riots and all the protests before. What was done since then? So we have to now actually focus on change and actually have a plan of action, actually plan that everyone can follow, everyone sees on a daily basis. And so, yeah.
And Tony and I have talked about this a lot. We go back and forth with this conversation. I always say I see it as, when I was in high school, they were teaching us government. And it was really the paradigm. When I went to undergraduate school, definitely going to HBCU, I got it. They extracted whatever high school was trying to teach you. But here's what you really need to know as an African American. It was the battle between Malcolm X
and Martin Luther King.
It was that, peaceful resolution or just straight out violence. And there are pros and cons to both. But, my thing is, and I was having this discussion, I get it. We're emotional beings. We have feelings, we have reactions, we have responses. So sometimes, especially all that we've been through in the course, I'll say the first 6 months of this year, it's a pandemic. There are all of these things that, and let's be honest, Black people have been killed unjustly for forever. This isn't new. What's new is that this face or this face or this face got some recognition, got some media coverage, and people got out and did more insane, this person's name, this person's name. So every time you say Sandra Bland, I'm sorry, how many thousands of her are there that we'll never know their name and got swept under the rug, and that's been going on for at least centuries. So it's not that I think her life is any less, valuable, or what happened was not horrendous, but this is nothing new. So I get it. People are outraged. They've had enough. And in times of such crisis, in times of this compacted tension and all of these things and chaos, all in a very short period, people have this energy where they have to do something.
Right.
I get it. Some things I may not have checked and say I would do. You had to express yourself in some shape or form. Got it. Not condemning you for that anyway. But if we go back through history at those that really made effective change, not a one-day thing, not a one-month thing, not a one-year thing, but changes that changed society, changed some of the laws, they had to plan. What happened to Rosa Parks happened to Rosa Parks. But they had to sit down as a people and plan and strategize. They could do the bus boycott, but one day of y'all all not taking the bus wouldn't do anything.
And that's and just to come into that, Alicia, these whole blackout phases, and I know you've seen it, Deputy Ross, black out your page or shop black for a week. That's not going to do anything.
Nothing.
Like you said, the plan, where's the plan and what's the purpose with the plan? And I think that's where African American communities lack, because they don't come together. Well, this era has not come together with a plan of action, and they haven't set on a real good purpose. It's great to pump your fist. That's great. It's great to march hand in hand. We saw a lot of different ethnicities out there amongst the protesters. Awesome. But after it's all said and done, what are you doing? And to what level do you want to take this? I've read somewhere where in one of these cities, they're not eating and they're camping out. It took over the city buildings. I forgot where this was, but they took over the city buildings and they're camping out. I'm sure you all have heard of this on the news. They're not speaking highly of it. They're not speaking a lot about it, but they talked about it briefly, where they're camping out, they're not eating, they're refusing to eat. But what is that changing within your community? What does that change within police reform? And talking about that, do you believe that there should be police reform, restructuring of the police department in a whole?
I believe that there are some changes that need to be done within the police agency. My personal, outside of my professional opinion, I believe that it should be some type of national standard that all agencies are held to, because what's going on in other people's backyards might not be going on in my backyard.
Right.
And the way our agency trains and where our state standards are set and the way our agency trains is different than other states. And so we may have certain trainings that supersedes other states' trainings, and where we see stuff on the news, it's like, how in the world, or what is going on with that? Like, who trained them? Mm-hmm. So I feel like it should be some type of national standard mandated that every agency should be held to as far as trainings. I know within our state that we're going to, of course, with everything that's going on, there's going to be some changes to our trainings and certain programs that's going to be implemented into our trainings real soon. So I just look forward to the state of North Carolina being ahead of the curve with everything. So police reform, okay, but it has to be, like you said, a plan and a purpose. What are we actually targeting when we say, reform and trainings? Like, what type of trainings? How much are we willing to invest in these trainings? Is it twice a year? We have to break it down. So people are frustrated. Okay, there's no training for police brutality. Stop police brutality training. There's no training for that. A lot of it is moral character, and certain officers make their own judgments and decisions in the act of what's going on in their scene. It has to be split second for most, and some can get carried away, and other officers have to be able to, join in and stop their partner from being excessive. If their partner is being excessive use of force. So, and also protecting those officers that do intervene when their partners are using excessive force.
Right.
It's, a lot of things that should be addressed.
Right.
I think you said it earlier. Is that you fight, if you want to fight, you fight in the courtroom. Talked about education. If we're going to have a national reform, we have to know the laws.
That's right.
How you get the change. It's nice, no one's condemning you for your blackout days, or we're going to build this community. That might be things for a longer infrastructure or something you can build upon now for a different foundation or narrative. But one of the best ways you beat people is their own game.
That's right.
Know the law and what your rights are. Just like everybody is upset now because they feel like they're being violated, our rights. You can't just come in my house and shoot it up, and then, people are going to just, wash their hands up, oh, he was a law enforcement officer, so, or he thought it was a threat. But at the same time, if you don't know the laws and how to evoke effective change with those laws, then the problem is going to stay there. Because I can tear down a monument, but I can't tear down the monument of your heart. I can't take that out of you.
That's right.
Make you stop being racist. That's a personal choice. Like you said, it's a moral thing.
You take down all the Confederate flags.
Exactly. I can tell you to take away Confederate flag. But if there's a Confederate flag known as your heart, I can't remove that one. So
that's their history.
Make the law work for you. And the only way you do that is to know the law. I think it's so sad that it wasn't until I was an adult really getting to understand what a lobbyist was. I went through government class. It was a mandate in high school. I went to college, and you have to take government and forms of things like that. Why are we as an African-American community not really exposed to what a lobbyist is and how that works and those little intricacies until either we're working in something or it comes up? Why isn't that a part of education?
Exactly.
See these inconsistencies? Those are the areas you need to explore further, because if they're not teaching it to you, that's probably something you need to know the change you desire. But that's my pulpit. I'm going to sit back for a minute and turn it right back over to Miss Saudi. I'm going to leave that alone, because that's 4 shows for me right there.
So Alicia knows that for me, teaching our youth how to become lobbyists, and I think that's something very vital, and I wanted to discuss it here with you because you can evoke change. You're in the school system. You could bring about a program of change to the county that you're in, and that could be something that could be spread, worldwide.
Yes.
These are things that we have spoken about, our youth not knowing how to properly protest. We need to teach our youth how to properly protest, and after the protest, what do we need?
They're feeling powerless too. The same thing adults feel we don't have any power or respect, they're feeling the exact same thing.
They're feeling the same thing, and their emotions are on high. So what we need to do is, as adults, we need to channel those that rage into something more positive. The pen has always been mightier than the sword. And
Oh,
when you
yes.
said, like Alicia was saying, when you said fight the battle in the courtroom, we want to teach our youth that the pen is mightier than the sword. Teach our youth how to write to their state capitals. I mean, how do you feel about that in reference to in getting political figures to endorse a program where we teach our youth how to lobby, how to
Making them accountable for the job they're actually
that they're in.
anyway when we vote.
Exactly.
Put that in there.
Yeah, I said a lot of information. I'm gonna back it up. I'm gonna back it up to before the pandemic hit. Culturally, anything dealing with government was not an interest within our community. Period. It's not.
No.
It's not in our culture. You know, it's not of importance. We value sports over education.
Woo!
Better say
We
that.
can afford to put our kids into camps and put them on travel basketball teams, travel teams, and for all type of skills training, but we don't invest in tutors. We don't have money for that. So we have to start valuing education over everything.
Thank you.
And so now that the pandemic hit, it kind of sat us all down and focused us on what's in front of us. We see that we lack in our education, and we see that we lack government knowledge. And so now it would be the perfect time to implement it because kids can now relate to it because they see the protesters going on. So if we wanted to sit them down and expose them to the procedures within government, you know, everything that goes on in DC and how the actual government system works, starting from law enforcement. Law enforcement is just the beginning. After law enforcement, it goes deep into the justice system. And so they have to know about the magistrates, the jobs of the district attorneys and what role they play as far as, you know, will they file charges against officers or will they not file charges against officers? So they have to, now would be the time to start implementing programs and pushing forward to it. And you'll have more kids that be more interested into it now because nobody's playing sports, barely.
Right, exactly.
And so all the focus is on education now.
This would be the perfect time to invoke those trainings upon our youth. I like what you said, that they're set down right now. They're focused. This is the time to focus on those things. Before the pandemic, you're right. People invested all this, especially in our communities, all this money in sports, training. You never once hear someone saying, well, I spent $700 on a tutor. I'm going to tell you, in my household, that's what we had to do for our son. That's what I'm doing for our daughter right now. She doesn't like it. She doesn't want to do a 4-week getting ready for 10th grade tutoring. It prepares you. It's sick. They teach her 6 months in advance of her 10th grade year. 6 months in advance. So she could propel forward. And she needs it because especially with all the virtual online learning that they're going to be doing, sometimes that our teachers weren't prepared for the virtual online learning in the beginning of this pandemic. They weren't prepared for that. Now they're probably a little bit more trained, but even still, there are going to be some bumps along the road. So I need her to understand that I need you to be ahead because there are going to be a lot of bumps in the road with this during COVID-19. And while I love the fact that, she's talented with basketball, she's talented with volleyball, I need her to, and she's also very academically bright, but I want her to continue on that road. So when you said that, wow, that's strong. And I think a lot more African-American parents need to understand that you don't need to just invest in your child's sports and getting them to every child wasn't meant to be a basketball player or a football player or a track runner. And while that's awesome, and I'm not downing any parent who has put forth the effort to ensure that their child has a scholarship within areas. But I also always preach that academics must be a must first, and especially the African-American households. because we lag behind. We really do lag behind.
And my thing is, okay, you pushing your kids in sports so they can get a scholarship, but once they get to college, then what?
Right. God, Lord. Preach it.
Then what?
Please say it again.
Then you run a risk of being on academic probation and have your scholarship taken. So
Exactly.
you have to have that balance.
Exactly.
From entrepreneurship, my thing is, if you want to pursue sports, that's great. Can we also do the other side of business, contracts? Because God forbid you make it and then lose most of your stuff because you don't understand financing. And my agent was supposed to take care of that, but you don't know how to read contracts. And certain things, you have people being the middleman and negotiating for you. You could have had a business to do it yourself and have more of your rights and royalties. So can we talk about, yeah, if you want to be an athlete, that's great. But can we also learn some of the other parts for those who will represent you?
The business side.
You want to be like Mike and you want to be the best basketball player in the world, but look at Mike. Mike knew that body and that career was going to be but so long, so he had to know a little bit something else. And now Mike, Shaq, a lot of the pro athletes.
Mike is a billionaire.
Right. So you want to do sports all day. But that's why academics is important, because you need to know, beside this, I have a relative that he had an academic scholarship, athletic rather, and he got hurt the first practice. He never got to play in college. It happens. So what now what? It's too many of us that are losing out. If we do make it to a certain rate, we're losing out because the people that manage us are taking advantage of us. And we don't speak the lingo. We didn't know how to read contracts. We didn't know the business things. We didn't know you could ask for this and not just trust people to do this. So be an athlete all you want to, but what's the other parts to being an athlete that you're not knowing the back end to make sure your future is secured, other than you doing this or doing this physically with your body?
Absolutely.
There's got to be a different narrative. So we could talk all night. This is a hot topic. But what I want to do is ask you, what is the solution? And everything that we're seeing with police brutality, racial injustice, biases, social unrest, all of these things, all of these actions that are out there, what is the solution? What is our next move that we should be doing?
We touched on quite a few solutions, but I've focused on three things.
Okay.
Education, one, communication, and collaboration. Because we all live on the same soil. We all live in this world, and we're intermingled. The officers that are police now, they were once somebody's baby that's being raised through a household, through that culture where morals are set within the house. And so from house to the school education, that's where they're focused, and their moral compass is being molded while they're in school. Once they get out of school now, they start applying for jobs and become law enforcement professionals. So everything starts at the address. It starts at the address. So that's where the moral compass is set. Because like I said, it's not a profession that's hurting people. It's individuals within a profession that's hurting people.
Absolutely.
And so we have to keep that in mind. And law enforcement is a job just like any other job out here. Our uniform comes off. We wake up, we go to work, get our coffee or whatever, and we get off. We get off, we have our family time. We, as you can see, I'm in plain clothes. I don't even look like a law enforcement officer now. If I step out of the house, I'm a regular black man in America.
That's right.
So we have to keep that in mind, that we're also members of the community also. Law enforcement officers are members of the community also, and see what's going on. We know what's going on. Some agencies have restrictions on as far as what we can do as far as speaking out, because it's written in certain policies and what you say about your agency, which can hold you accountable for certain things, which is why a lot of law enforcement don't speak out on certain issues, because they know they're bounded by policy as far as not speaking out. So it's not a code of blue or backing up blue or any of that thing. It's my life is on the line, my career is on the line,
That's right.
I have a family to take care of at the end of the day. You know, I feel the frustration, I feel the pain, but we have to move forward. And then communication. When you're out in public talking to law enforcement officers, have a conversation with them, talk to them. They're not, you know, they're people. They're people like any other person. We wait in line when we go to grocery stores to get stuff, or when we get our food, we have to stand in line like everyone else. You know, we have to pay for our food like everyone else.
Right.
So it's no difference. Communicating, what I also mean about communication is communities, members of the community talking to law enforcement officers. And us as law enforcement officers, we have to get out of our vehicles and walk the beat, as some people may say, or walk your area in your community and get to know the people that's within your area and establish that relationship. And so communication is a lot. And once you establish that relationship with members of the community, then they'll start to develop some sort of trust. And they can tell you what's going on in their community, where you don't have to work as hard, or you approach a situation a little bit differently because you're familiar with the people in your community. And collaboration is, once you've discussed all the problems and issues, you collaborate on finding a solution instead of fighting each other, you know, knocking heads.
That's right.
And so my thing is just focusing on education, communication, and collaboration. That's a good start.
Oh, wow. Alicia, he said a mouthful. And Deputy Ross, I love that. Education,
Yes.
communication, collaboration. And you really should put something to that. Do a pilot program, ECC. Seriously, you're bright, young man, and you have a bright future with the youth, especially educating them with all of your knowledge. You know, so education, communication,
Yes.
and collaboration. I love that. Yes.
I absolutely love that. I mean, I think that says it all.
Yes.
Before I ask how our listeners, our viewers tonight can get in contact with you, I'd love to give you an opportunity to shout out your department, because I know you're a proud law enforcement officer and you love the agency that you actually work for. So tell us a little bit about that.
Where you can reach me?
Oh, no, actually, just shout out where you work for.
I work for a great agency, Durham County Sheriff's Office in the state of North Carolina. I love the agency. My agency's been real supportive. The sheriff, he's been real supportive as far as us speaking out, as far as the issues that's going on. And I guess he feels that it's important that the community knows how we feel as well. You know, giving us that opportunity to speak out without, reprimanding us or making us feel nervous about speaking out of issues that's going on around the world. Because those issues that's going on actually affect us and our families. So
yes,
not separated or protected, by our uniform. So I'm just grateful that, we have a great sheriff, we have great training staff. I have a lot of great colleagues that I work with. I couldn't be more happy at this point in my career. And I love being a law enforcement officer. It's the best decision I ever made. My dreams growing up was to be a professional football player. So my dreams got derailed, and I guess this is my calling.
Yes.
So I'm enjoying every bit of it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, because I wanted to make sure, we hear people talk and people just assume things, but there's a lot of great officers who are working for great departments that are, that it's not that environment. So when we have those, we want to get a chance to learn more about them. For maybe somebody who is listening and might be in that area or relocating and needs to know. With the stereotype, it's not there in every agency. So here's a great one. Here's a great, group of people who are actually doing things. And for anyone in that area, or maybe they're looking to relocate to that area, this may be a career path there that they're looking into. So we're glad to hear, especially in the Triangle area of North Carolina. It's not like you're in the States. There is a vibrant, great law enforcement agency that's really doing some great things. It has that healthy environment. So for our viewers and as well as our listeners, how can they get in contact with you?
They can contact me on social media. Blue, BLUE _ Leo, LEO 86. I'm on Facebook as far as EJ Ross. If you need to email me, you can email me at osceola.ross@gmail.com.
All right. And we'll make sure for those that are part of our show's Facebook group, as far as those that are listening on the podcast, all the places we have on the mailing list, we'll make sure you get that information. And we'll also share it when this goes up to our YouTube channel as well. But we just thank you for taking the time, because we know, especially in that profession, you have a very busy schedule. But we thank you for taking the time to just really come here, have some real talk, give that insider point of view, and really help to, I would say, get us back in alignment of what the real issues are and not feeling so helpless. Understanding certain things we should know, certain things we should focus on and look out for. Because, just like the pandemic, this is going to be over. And we're going to have to live with some of these actions. We're going to have to live with some of these things and some of these issues that are currently going on. And the only way, there's some solutions that are going to work. Is some things right now we're doing temporarily. They get rid of emotions, but they're just really not effective for change. And that's what we want. If we're going to save lives, if we're going to save our community, we're going to nurture our community, we have to have effective change. It won't happen if we're killing off our future or if we're damaging the very communities that we have to live in. So this was a very important discussion. Of course, I think we need to have more discussions like this in all different environments, because for those people that are aggravated and they feel just disgusted and what do I do, we need to have viable solutions for things you can actually do that's not hurting yourself or hurting or endangering others. So again, we thank you for this very important discussion, taking the time. And do you have any last words for our viewers or our listeners?
Just keep the faith. Change is not going to come overnight. We have to be persistent and consistent. We have to come up with a plan of action and a purpose for what we plan on doing after everything's done. After we finish the protest, after all your energy of the protest is gone away, then what? We have to move forward, and opening the doors for all minorities to look into your law enforcement agencies. Do your research, and working in law enforcement is a great way to give back to your community and protect your community. All
right. Well, there you hear it from Deputy Sheriff EJ Ross. And thank you so much for viewing or listening, whichever way you're listening to this episode, for the Entrepreneurs Lounge radio show and podcast. And as always, you're able to go to the entrepreneurslounge.info for all show replays, additional information, and also to reach out to us and our guests. Bye-bye for now.